He is 70 years old, and he cannot stop his bowels from emptying. For 9 days this has been happening. A hemorrhage the physicians cannot close. Weakness spreading through a body that spent 4 decades marching through mud and blood without complaint. And now, in a small villa outside Rome, surrounded by men waiting for him to become a corpse, he tries to stand up. Attendants rush forward to help him. He waves them off. An emperor, he tells them, ought to die on his feet. He gets partway up. Then he doesn't. Within hours, the Senate will vote him a god. Temples will be built. Coins will be struck, showing him seated among the gods of Olympus, calm, eternal, untouchable. But the man who actually died that July, soiled, exhausted, mid-sentence with his own mortality, does not appear on any of those coins. Someone made sure of that. The question this video answers is not just how Vespasian died. It's who decided the way he died wasn't the version Rome was allowed to keep. To understand why this mattered, you need to understand what Vespasian actually was, which is not what an emperor was supposed to be. He wasn't born to rule. He came from Rewrote, a nowhere town in the Sabine Hills, the son of a tax collector and a minor financier. No emperor before him had a background so unglamorous, so provincial, so, Roman aristocrats would have said, vulgar. He rose through the army, not the Senate floor, commanding legions in Britain, and then, decisively, crushing the Jewish revolt in Judea. He became emperor in 69 AD, not through inheritance but through civil war, the so-called Year of the Four Emperors, when Rome burned through 3 rulers in 12 months before Vespasian's legions marched on Rome and made him the 4th. That mattered enormously for what came after. A man who seizes power through military force, rather than receiving it through bloodline, has one urgent problem once he's actually holding the throne: legitimacy. Vespasian needed Rome to believe his rule was not an accident of civil war, but something closer to destiny. He needed the aristocracy, who despised his low birth, to accept him. He needed the army, who'd put him there, to keep believing it. And eventually, he needed the machinery of state religion, the Senate's power, to formally declare a dead emperor divine, to say, retroactively, that everything about him had been sanctioned by heaven all along. Which means the manner of his death was never a private matter. It was political material. Suetonius, writing decades later with access to imperial records and eyewitness accounts, preserved something rulers usually managed to erase: the emperor's own black humor about the process, and the undignified physical reality underneath the marble version that followed. This video is about the gap between those two things: what Suetonius says actually happened, and what the Senate voted into permanent record 9 days after. By the summer of 79 AD, Vespasian had ruled for a decade, and Rome had, by most measures, stabilized. He'd rebuilt the treasury after Nero's excesses and the chaos of 69. He'd started construction on the Flavian Amphitheater, the building we now call the Colosseum. He had 2 adult sons, Titus and Domitian, ready to continue the dynasty, which was itself a novelty. Rome hadn't had a peaceful, planned hereditary succession in living memory. Then, according to Suetonius in the 12 Caesars, he traveled to Campania, as he did most summers, and while there developed what Suetonius describes as a mild feverish complaint, he continued performing his duties. Suetonius specifically notes he kept receiving delegations and conducting state business, even while unwell, which tells you something about how Vespasian understood the job. He didn't retreat from Rome's daily machinery. He tried to run the empire from a sickbed. The condition worsened. He traveled to Cutiliae, in the Sabine Hills near his birthplace, apparently seeking the cooler air and mineral waters he customarily used each summer. It was there that the illness turned serious. Suetonius records a violent attack of diarrhoea, severe enough that Vespasian understood, correctly, that he was dying. This is the part of the record worth sitting with, because it is almost never what surviving portraiture or public commemoration of an emperor looks like. We are used to Roman death scenes rendered as philosophical set pieces, the composed Stoic exit, dignified last words about duty and empire. What Suetonius gives us instead is closer to gallows humor from a dying man who apparently had no illusions about what was about to happen to his reputation. Vespasian is reported to have said, in Latin, "Ve, puto Deus fio." Oh dear, I think I'm turning into a god. Sit with that line for a second, because it is doing more work than a joke. Vespasian knew, had to know, having engineered his own son's deification apparatus and having watched the Senate's machinery declare Claudius divine a generation earlier, exactly what was coming. He knew the Senate would vote him a god within days of his death, regardless of how undignified the actual dying looked. He was, in his final lucid moments, mocking the gap between the ritual and the reality in advance. It's one of the driest, most self-aware lines any Roman emperor is recorded as saying, and it only makes sense if you understand it as commentary on a process he'd already seen happen to his predecessors. Then comes the detail this video is built around. As his condition deteriorated further, Suetonius records that Vespasian, true to a lifetime of physical discipline, insisted on trying to rise to his feet, reportedly saying an emperor ought to die standing. Attendants moved to support him. He died in the attempt, or immediately after it, weakened past the point his body could sustain the effort. The specific site of his final collapse is where ancient sources get thinner and modern retellings get looser than they should. What's solidly attested is the illness, a severe intestinal hemorrhage, consistent with what a modern reader would recognize as dysentery or a related gastrointestinal collapse, and the joke about becoming a god and the insistence on dying upright. What later, less careful tradition has sometimes compressed into died on the toilet is an extrapolation from the nature of the illness itself, not a line any surviving primary source states outright. This channel won't claim more certainty than the sources support. What we can say with confidence is this: the illness was humiliating, prolonged, and undignified in a way state religion has no vocabulary for, and Vespasian appears to have known it and made peace with the absurdity before he died. 9 days after his final collapse, the interval Roman custom required before the Senate could formally act, his son Titus opened the process of consecration. Divus Vespasianus, a temple was voted. His image joined the pantheon on coinage across the empire. There was no burned document, no single decree ordering silence. Roman erasure rarely worked that bluntly except in cases of formal damnatio memoriae, which Vespasian never suffered. What happened to his death was subtler and, in some ways, more revealing of how the machinery actually functioned. Selective emphasis, official coinage, and public architecture simply built the version of the story that mattered and let the other version survive only in text, where far fewer people would ever encounter it. Titus had every incentive to move fast toward deification and away from the sick room. A newly consecrated god as your father is a legitimacy transfer, divine sonship, inherited authority, a Senate vote that retroactively sanctified the entire Flavian claim to power. The temple of the deified Vespasian, begun under Titus and completed under Domitian, still stands in fragmentary form in the Roman Forum today. 3 columns, visible to any tourist in Rome, a permanent physical argument for the version of Vespasian the dynasty wanted remembered. No inscription, no relief, no coin shows the diarrhoea, the failed attempt to stand, the joke about becoming a god. That material only survives because Suetonius, writing under Hadrian roughly 40 years later, with access to court records and secretarial archives, apparently felt no obligation to protect the Flavian dynasty's dignity, and included it anyway. That's the actual mechanism of survival here, and it's worth naming precisely, because it cuts against the tidy, everything got erased narrative. Nothing was destroyed. The unflattering account wasn't suppressed by force. It simply never got carved into marble, because marble was never where undignified truths went. It went into biography, a genre with looser loyalty to imperial image management than state monuments ever had. Suetonius could include the joke and the collapse, because by the time he wrote, no living Flavian needed protecting, and because his entire project as a biographer was assembling exactly this kind of unofficial texture, gossip, physical detail, private moment, that official Rome never bothered recording because official Rome didn't think it needed to. What you're left with when you lay the evidence side by side isn't a conspiracy in the dramatic sense, no single hand erasing a single fact. It's something more ordinary and, honestly, more permanent. 2 records existing in parallel from the start, one built for temples and one for texts, and only one of them designed to last in public view. The temple survived as ruins. The joke survived as a sentence in a book, copied by scribes who had no stake in Flavian dignity, centuries after the dynasty ended. What we can't fully verify, where he died, precisely, whether on his feet means he made it upright or collapsed reaching for it, the sources themselves won't settle, and neither will we. That uncertainty is honest, not evasive. But the larger pattern holds, regardless of the exact physical detail. The version of power that gets carved in stone is rarely the version that actually happened in the room. Institutions build the record they need, standing long after the people are gone. It's not a uniquely Roman instinct. It's just one Rome happened to leave 3 columns of, standing in a forum, still telling half the story.